Adobe Photoshop, working with adjustment layers. Traditional layers in Photoshop can be used to add or move around text or other objects in a Photoshop document. However, when we talk about adjustment layers, they're doing something else different altogether. In this session, we're going to go ahead and cover what adjustment layers are and how they work. First of all, let's go ahead and get our adjustments panel. Now it's over on the right-hand side of our screen, and if I double-click it, it will pop out. If you don't see the adjustment panel on the right-hand side of your screen, you can always go to Window, go down to Adjustments, and click, and that will pop out your adjustment panel as well. What adjustment layers offer is the ability to manipulate the look and feel of our photograph without actually destroying the original image. All of the adjustments that we make will live on top of the original image. Therefore, at any time, we can delete those changes and the original photo remains untouched. This is a huge benefit, especially if you're working with an older version of Photoshop. The more edits you make, the more you're potentially destroying your image. That's what's called destructive editing. When you use adjustment layers, you don't have to worry about this. You have completely non-destructive editing. Now, I usually like to start with the levels adjustment layer. Now, there's a bunch in here. You can see there's brightness and contrast, levels, curves, exposure, vibrance, hue and saturation, color balance, black and white, photo filter, channel mixer, invert, posterize, threshold, gradient map, and selective color. There are a lot of options, and also at the bottom of our adjustments panel, there are many presets too. There are levels presets, curve presets, exposure presets, etc. When you're getting started with adjustment layers, you may want to just go in there and play around with those presets. They're really great. For example, if I click on the levels presets, I can choose one that would make it darker. And I'm just going to go ahead and undo that. I could increase contrast. And there's other ones too. I could increase contrast 2. It's a different setting. Or increase contrast 3. And just by simply adjusting the contrast of the image, you get a very different look and feel to this image. So those are the presets, but what if I wanted to go ahead and tweak these myself? I would start by coming up to levels and clicking. Then I get this little histogram, and what I can do if I wanted to adjust the contrast, what they did here is just sort of clicked and dragged to the right. And I'll click and drag over here to the left. And that's going to increase the contrast. And that's a very simple adjustment layer function. Now, I may really not want that. Now, I can come down here to see what it's doing here in my layers panel. If I decide that I do like this, I can leave it. But if I want to see what it looks like without it, we have our visibility icon for our adjustment layer. And I can come in here and just click that, and I can see sort of the before and after. And I may or may not like that, but for the purpose of this session, I'm going to go ahead and say that I don't like it. So if I want to get rid of my levels, I'm just going to hit delete, and then it goes away. Now I'm going to come back up to my adjustment panel, and by the way, I'm getting these by double-clicking. I'm just double-clicking on adjustments to view adjustments, or double-clicking layers to view layers. So I want in my adjustments now possibly to use curves. Now curves works similarly to levels, but in a different interface. In order to effect a change here in curves, what I'm going to do is just sort of click. I'm just going to sort of bump this up, and you can see I'm making the darker areas lighter. Now conversely, if I want those darker areas to be even darker, I can move down. And you can see it has a similar effect to adjusting the levels. By having the levels down like this, it's really accentuating that microphone. I might go ahead and leave that one in there. I'm going to do that. Now let's say I want to add another adjustment layer. The way to do that is to come down to this little left arrow that when you hover over it, it turns green, and that is the return arrow that allows us to return to our adjustment layer. Now there is a generic exposure control in here as well. I generally do my changes under levels or under curves, but you can also adjust exposure as well and sort of make it more exposed or less exposed as well. I added just a tad of exposure to the overall image. Now I'm going to come back out here and look at my other options. Another adjustment layer that I really like is Vibrance. Vibrance gets you so far, I think. I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And I use it so much more than the hue and saturation panel because I get saturation in here as well as Vibrance. Now if I just sort of click and drag this up, I'm way over here at plus 52. And you'll notice that the lights in particular are getting very, very, very bright. The microphone itself is changing a little bit in color, but it's sort of silver and gray, so there's not a whole lot of color to add. But I can really pop the Vibrance up and make it kind of, well, look more colorful. I can sort of come back here down a little bit too. If I want to almost go toward the black and white, I can decrease the Vibrance. Now, unlike saturation, Vibrance adds in a more realistic way. If I was to bump up the saturation, it can look sort of cartoony if I go too high. This image doesn't have a whole lot of color, so I can almost get away with this, but this is really too much saturation. So I'm going to drop this down and leave my Vibrance up a little bit higher. So now as I look in my layers panel down here, I can see that I have Vibrance 1, Exposure 1, and Curves 1. And if I want to see how it looks without any of these, I can see that certainly without the curves, it looks very different. And without the exposure, I can see that that's a very subtle difference. That might even be hard to see on your screen, but I do think I like it better with that adjustment there. And the Vibrance one, that's making very little difference as well, but I do like it better with it on. It is adding just a little bit more richness to the colors that are there. So now I would come back up to my adjustments panel, and I'm going to return to the main adjustments panel window here. And there's a couple other nice ones in here. Color balance is a good one, and this is pretty well balanced, this image. It might be a little bit warm, but what I can do here is sort of say, you know, I'm going to adjust this and make this go a little bit more cyan than red. And if I go too far, it can really kind of look, again, sort of, that's too much. See, if I take it too far, although that might be an effect you're looking for, but I don't think I really want that effect. So I'm just going to keep it, maybe take a little bit of the red out. And same thing here, I can go magenta or green. And I might just go a tad green. I just add a little bit of green. And when it comes to yellow or blue, my instinct is to want to add yellow. Yeah, if I add some blue, it looks really realistic. And I want it to have that sort of warm feel to it. So I'm going to add some yellow in. Now this is just for my midtones. So if I come in here to the shadows, I can adjust my shadows as well. And I might want to add a little bit of cyan or a little bit of red. Actually, probably looks pretty good here. Just a tad red. And then to my middle magenta or green slider here, I'm just going to leave that pretty close to the center. Maybe just tad magenta. That's not quite what I want here. Let me go a tad green. There, just a little bit green. And finally with the dark, I can go with either blue or yellow. By adding yellow, it actually makes it a little bit brighter as well. The blue really just makes the microphone stand out. So I'm just going to add a little bit extra blue. And to the highlights here, the highlights, this is sort of the lights. If I sort of do this, it's going to really affect the quality of the lights. So I don't want to adjust this one too much. Maybe just a tad cyan. And leave the magenta pretty much in the middle. And yeah, just again pretty close. Just make slight adjustments here. So now that I have this, I'm really sort of tweaking this up. It's really quite fun. The next one I'm going to add in and then take out, because the next one really kind of changes the game. This is the black and white adjustment layer. If you aren't familiar with this black and white adjustment layer, you really should play around with it. We actually have a short session that deals with this all on its own. I'm going to go ahead and click this one. And what this does is it actually allows me to choose the different values, red, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, and magentas, and decide if I want them to be lighter or darker. So I can sort of pick the different elements in here and whether I want them to be lighter or darker. And in so doing, I can really kind of customize what this image is going to look like. And some of these don't make much difference because there's already a lot of dark in here. Yeah, something like that. There we go. And now I'm going to come down here and you can see I'm collecting all of these adjustment layers. I'm just going to sort of do that one and undo it and see what that looks like. Right? Makes a pretty decent black and white image. And by the way, this is the kind of image that I would go ahead and add some text right over here. It's kind of balanced to have the nice microphone over here, and then if I needed to do this for some sort of poster or postcard or whatever event card, I could go ahead and put the text over this side of it. Now I don't want the black and white adjustment layer, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Now there is a fun shortcut key here in Photoshop I'm going to hit. It's F12 on your keyboard. And F12 is the revert key. And I always like that one. If you look over at the right hand side of my screen, inside my layers panel now, you'll see that all of my adjustment layers are gone. So this is what the image looked like when I started. So this is where it started. And now I'm just going to use Control Z, or if I go to edit, you can see that this is revert, or I'm sorry, undo. In this case, it would undo my revert. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and hit Control Z. Now Photoshop, unlike other programs, will not keep stepping backward and backward and backward when I hit Control Z. It only toggles on and off whatever I did last. So I just took off my revert back to the saved version, and I'm going to hit it again. So now I can toggle on and off and say, okay, well, this is what I started with, and this is where I ended up. What I started with, where I ended up. And I can decide if I like that. If I don't, then I can go back and adjust my adjustment layers, or if I do like it, I can leave it alone. Now, I might want to come in here and adjust my curve some. In this case, what I would do is come in here and just, there's a layer thumbnail icon, I'm just going to double click it. And in so doing, it brings up my adjustment layer again. And then I can sort of make whatever changes I want. And I'm just going to bring up my levels just a little bit, probably about there. I like this curve just slightly better. I made the output, it was at 10, I believe, and now I'm up at 18. So you'll see here that that didn't add another adjustment layer. All that did was edited my initial adjustment layer. Now if you want, and it gives you a whole new set of options, I actually could come in here and revisit an adjustment layer that I already did. In general, you don't want to do this, but I'll just show you that I could. Let's see. I already have a Vibrance. So if I come back in here and click Vibrance again, I can come back in here and put a Vibrance layer over the top of it and add a little bit more Vibrance. Maybe something like that. And I bump the saturation down some. We'll see what effect that really has. So now I should have, and you can see I do, a Vibrance 1 and a Vibrance 2. And I'm going to move this Vibrance 2. Actually, we'll just leave it right there. But you can see that I have a Vibrance 1 and a Vibrance 2, and now I can see what it looks like with it and without it. And again, it's a very subtle change. I'm not sure how this is actually recording, but there is a difference there. And if I don't want it, again, I can just hit the delete key. And notice when I click the delete key, I hit the delete key on my keyboard, it got rid of the mask, and now the layer, when I hit delete, will go away. So if you don't click and drag down to your trash can here, you will have to delete in a two-step process. Okay, so that is with our adjustments. Now the final row here, I've sort of focused on these first two rows because these are really a lot of your actual photography type adjustments, and those are the ones you'll use most. The ones down here are really effect layers. So if I come here and choose invert, that gives me obviously an incredibly different image. I'm going to undo that. Similarly, if I choose posterize, it's very different. Right? And I can choose how many levels. If I reduce the levels, it becomes more sort of posterized. And if I up the levels, then it becomes more photo-like again. If you're going to use posterize, and I don't necessarily recommend it, it's probably best to go with fewer levels. And again, if I'm doing a poster, this may actually kind of work. And I'm going to go ahead and undo these. There we go. And then also in here is threshold. And threshold, this is another one where you can sort of decide how much of the image you want to sort of shine through. But it's basically turning this into a simple black and white image with no grays. But it's deciding sort of how much, where that threshold is to what becomes white and what becomes black. You almost can't even tell what this is at this point. I guess it looks like a microphone, but you almost can't even tell. Right? And then the gradient map. The gradient map is fun. You can see here that I have this sort of gradient. It's just moving from sort of a light blue to a dark blue, and I can reverse this if I want. And it makes kind of a nice sort of interesting duotone. There's also this red and green here. And again, I can reverse any of these. And there's this sort of orange to purple. And then there's this red, yellow, blue. I kind of like this one, and I'm going to undo the reverse. I might use this for a design. This is kind of a fun image like this. And I think it's actually pretty usable. Some of these other ones, maybe, maybe not. You could create your own gradients in here as well and then use those. I'm just using the stock ones. This copper one is pretty nice. That one looks pretty good. And if I reverse that, yeah, that's actually kind of an interesting look as well. It really just depends upon what you're trying to do, right? This one almost looks infrared. If you're trying to fake an infrared camera look, this spectrum actually works pretty nicely, and I can reverse that. Yeah, I'm not sure which way it looks more like infrared. Maybe this way, maybe that way. I'm not sure. But if you're trying to do a fake infrared look, this would certainly fit the bill. So it's kind of a fun one as well. I'm going to undo that. But there you go. That is adjustment layers in a nutshell. Remember, you have all these presets if you want to play around with those. And then just go ahead and add ones as you feel like you need them. And for many other tutorials on Photoshop, go ahead and check out our Log On to Learn library. Thanks a lot.